She had spent a lifetime fading into the background until the night a single choice threatened to upend every rule she had ever lived by. A forbidden gown, a gaze she was never meant to catch, and a secret capable of shattering the delicate order that held her world together. Now, as desire collides with duty, the past rises like a silent storm, demanding answers, and a sacrifice no heart should be forced to make. Before we begin, tell me, from where are you listening to this story? And what do you love most about historical romances, the longing, the danger, or the impossible choices? In the misty hills of the Cotswolds, where honey-coloured stone cottages huddled against the relentless English wind, Eleanor Hawthorne had learned to fade into the shadows. At 22, she was the quiet daughter of a modest vicar, her days filled with the rustle of turning pages in the parish library and the soft chime of church bells calling the faithful to prayer. But beneath her unassuming muslin gowns and pinned-up auburn hair, a fire smouldered, one that no one, not even she, fully understood. It was the year 1815, and the world beyond their secluded village of Willowbrook buzzed with the echoes of Napoleon's defeat. Yet here, in this pocket of rural England, life moved to the rhythm of harvest festivals and whispered scandals among the gentry. Eleanor's family teetered on the edge of gentility. Her father, Reverend Thomas Hawthorne, preached sermons of humility while his debts mounted from a failed wool venture. Her mother, frail and forever mending lace, dreamed of elevating their station through an advantageous match. And Eleanor? She dreamed of more than survival, of a love that saw her, truly saw her, beyond the veil of propriety. For years, she had watched him from afar. The Duke of Ashford, Edward Blackwood, was the most sought-after bachelor in the county. Tall and broad-shouldered, with raven hair that fell just so over piercing blue eyes, he cut a figure straight from the romantic novels Eleanor devoured in secret. At 30, he embodied power and mystery, his estate of Blackwood Manor looming like a sentinel over the valleys. Whispers followed him. Heir to vast lands, a war hero from Waterloo, yet distant, almost haunted. Ladies from Bath to London vied for his attention, their silks and feathers a whirlwind at every assembly. But Edward, he ignored them all, or so it seemed. Eleanor remembered the first time their paths crossed, 5 years prior, at the Willowbrook Harvest Ball. She was 17, awkward in her mother's hand-me-down gown, spilling punch on her skirt while laughing with the village children. He had ridden in on horseback, his cloak billowing like a storm cloud, and scanned the room with that cool detachment. Their eyes met for a fleeting second across the crowded hall. Her heart had stuttered, a spark igniting in the dim light of lanterns. But he turned away, as if she were no more than a shadow on the wall. Since then, it had become a pattern. Assemblies, church services, even the market fairs. He was there, a magnetic force drawing every eye but hers, or so she told herself. Eleanor buried the ache in her duties, tending the garden's wild roses, teaching the parish girls their letters, sketching the rolling hills under stormy skies. "You are invisible to him," she'd whisper to her reflection in the cracked mirror, "and perhaps that's for the best." For what place had a vicar's daughter in the world of dukes? Society's rigid lines, those unspoken rules of rank and fortune, kept them worlds apart. Yet fate, that capricious weaver, had other plans. One crisp autumn evening, as leaves turned to flame on the ancient oaks, Eleanor's world tilted. Her mother, summoning strength from some hidden well, unpacked a parcel arrived from a distant cousin in London. Inside lay a gown unlike any Eleanor had seen, crimson silk, bold and unyielding, cut in the high-waisted fashion of the season, but dyed in a shade that evoked forbidden passions. "Wear it to the upcoming ball at Blackwood Manor," her mother urged, eyes gleaming with rare excitement. The Duke hosts it himself this year. It's your chance, child, to be seen." Eleanor's fingers trembled as she held the fabric. It was scandalous, this red dress, whispering of temptations no proper lady dared embrace. In the pale blues and whites of her usual attire, she blended into the wallpaper. But this would command attention, shatter the silence of her overlooked years. She imagined slipping into it, the silk hugging her slender frame, her green eyes fierce against the colour. Would he notice then? Or would it invite ruin? Gossip from the matrons, disapproval from her father, exile from the fragile social circle that sustained them. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues that mirrored the gown, Eleanor stood at her window, heart pounding. The ball was mere days away, and with it a choice that could upend everything. Ignore the dress, remain unseen, safe in obscurity. Or don it, step into the light, and risk the Duke's gaze, risk everything for a glance that might finally acknowledge the woman burning beneath the surface. The wind howled outside, carrying the distant clip-clop of hooves. Was that him riding the lanes again? Eleanor's breath caught. Little did she know, this red thread of fate would unravel years of indifference, pulling them into a storm of passion, betrayal, and unbreakable will. If this tale has captured your heart from the very first whisper, hit that subscribe button now and drop a comment below telling me your city and country. You won't want to miss how Eleanor's bold step changes everything. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of the Hawthorne vicarage, casting delicate patterns on the worn oak table where Eleanor sat, her quill scratching across a ledger of parish accounts. Willowbrook stirred awake around her, the lowing of cows in distant meadows, the creak of cartwheels on the cobblestone path leading to the church. At 22, Eleanor's days unfolded like the pages of a well-thumbed prayer book, predictable, dutiful, edged with quiet longing. Reverend Thomas Hawthorne, her father, paced the small parlour adjacent, his black frock coat buttoned to the collar despite the warmth. At 55, his once stout frame had thinned from worry, his greying sideburns framing a face etched with lines from sermons and ledgers that never balanced. "The wool prices from last harvest won't cover the tithes, Eleanor," he muttered, rubbing his temples. "We must pray for a mild winter, or a miracle from the squire's benevolence." Eleanor nodded, her auburn curls escaping their pins to brush her shoulders. She wore a simple morning gown of sprigged muslin, its high neckline modest, the skirt falling straight to her ankles in the fashion of the day. No frills for a vicar's daughter. Extravagance was for the gentry who filled the pews on Sundays, their silk pelisses and beaver hats a stark contrast to the woolens of the villagers. "Father, perhaps Mr. Jenkins at the mill could advance us credit," she suggested softly, her green eyes steady. She had learned early to temper hope with practicality, mending not just hems, but the fraying seams of their lives. From the kitchen came the clatter of pots, where her mother, Margaret, stirred porridge over the hearth. Frail at 48, with hands gnarled from years of needlework, Margaret dreamed in stitches, elaborate samplers adorning the walls, each thread a wish for elevation. "Eleanor, dear, set the table," she called, her voice thin but insistent. "And mind your posture, one never knows who might call." The family gathered, bowing heads for grace. Reverend Hawthorne intoned thanks for the modest bounty, oats from the glebe lands, milk from their single cow. Yet beneath the words tension simmered. The Hawthornes clung to gentility by a thread, their home a stone cottage with thatched roof, humble compared to the sprawling estates dotting the Cotswolds. Etiquette ruled even here, no elbows on the table, addresses formal even among kin. "Pass the salt, if you please," Eleanor said to her younger brother, young Timothy, who at 15 fidgeted with his spoon, his breeches patched at the knees. After breakfast, Eleanor stepped into the garden, the air crisp with the scent of damp earth and blooming lavender. She tended the roses, their petals soft under her gloved fingers, a ritual that soothed the ache in her chest. The village of Willowbrook sprawled before her. Honey-hued cottages clustered around the grey spire of St. Mary's Church, where she assisted with Sunday school. Children scampered in the yard, their laughter a balm, but Eleanor's thoughts drifted, as they often did, to him. Edward Blackwood, Duke of Ashford. The name alone evoked a shiver. His manor, Blackwood Hall, crowned the hill a mile distant, its turrets piercing the sky like a crown of thorns. Tales swirled through the parish. The Duke returned from the Peninsular campaigns, his valour at Waterloo whispered in taverns. Yet he shunned society, hosting rare assemblies that drew ladies from Oxfordshire and beyond. Eleanor had seen him thrice since that harvest ball 5 years past. Once at market, bargaining for horses with a curt nod to the crowd. Once at church, his broad shoulders filling the family pew, eyes fixed on the altar. And last Michaelmas, riding past the vicarage, his black stallion snorting steam into the autumn chill. Each time, no glance her way. She was heir to him, invisible amid the flock. Why dwell on shadows? Her friend Clara Benton often chided during their walks along the brook. Clara, daughter of the local apothecary, was bolder, her freckled face framed by bonnets trimmed with ribbons. At 20, she collected admirers like pressed flowers, giggling over quadrilles and stolen dances. The Duke seeks a bride with dowry, not dreams, Eleanor. Best set your sights on Lieutenant Hargrove. He's kind, and his regiment postings could mean adventure. Eleanor smiled faintly, clipping a thorny stem. Adventure. Her world was this: lessons for the parish girls in the church hall, where she taught embroidery and deportment, instilling the graces that might one day lift them from servitude. Yet envy nipped at her heels. The gentry's hierarchies loomed large, dukes at the pinnacle, vicars mere steps above labourers. A misstep, a whispered impropriety, and one's name could tarnish like tarnished silver. As noon approached, Eleanor returned indoors, the red gown haunting her thoughts. It lay hidden in her wardrobe, its silk whispering secrets. Her mother had pressed the matter at tea the evening prior. Cousin Lydia in London sent it with purpose, child. The ball at Blackwood Hall is no village frolic. It's the event of the season. Wear it and doors may open. Doors to what, mother? Scandal? Eleanor had replied, though her pulse quickened at the vision, the crimson against her skin, turning heads in the grand saloon. Margaret's eyes had softened. To possibility, we've scraped by too long. Your father, the debts press. A connection to the Duke's circle could secure our future. The words lingered, a first crack in the facade of their ordered life. Eleanor busied herself with correspondence, sealing letters to parishioners with wax stamped by the vicarage crest. A humble dove. But as she worked, a knock echoed at the door. Timothy dashed to answer, returning with a sealed missive, its paper heavy, the wax bearing an unfamiliar crest, a fox entwined with vines. "For you, Eleanor," he said, brow furrowed, "from Blackwood Hall." Her heart slammed against her ribs. She broke the seal with trembling fingers. The script was elegant, formal, an invitation to the Duke's ball, extended to the Hawthorne family by grace of their station. But scrawled at the bottom, in a hand less steady, a note. "Miss Hawthorne, your presence is particularly requested. Matters of the parish concern us both." Who had penned that? The Duke himself, or some secretary's error? Eleanor's mind raced. Rumours had trickled in, whispers of the Duke's interest in enclosing common lands, which could upend the villagers' livelihoods, including her father's flock. Was this a summons disguised as courtesy? Or something more personal, shattering years of indifference? She clutched the paper, the garden's peace fracturing. As shadows lengthened across the vicarage floor, Eleanor realized the gown was no longer a choice, but a weapon in a game she had yet to understand. And in the distance, thunder rumbled, promising a storm to match the one brewing within. The invitation burned in Eleanor's hand like a brand, its heavy vellum crinkling under her fingers as she reread the scrawled note. "Matters of the parish concern us both." The words mocked her, stirring a whirlwind of doubt and defiance in the quiet vicarage parlour. Outside, the Cotswolds wind rattled the window panes, as if the hills themselves sensed the shift in her world. She folded the paper carefully, tucking it into the bodice of her gown, where it pressed against her racing heart. Timothy hovered nearby, his young eyes wide with curiosity. "Is it from the Duke, Ellie? Does he want to marry you?" His innocent tease drew a sharp glance from their mother, who appeared in the doorway, wiping flour from her apron. "Hush, boy," Margaret said, though her gaze fixed on Eleanor with unspoken questions. "What does it say, daughter?" Eleanor hesitated, the weight of family expectations settling like fog over the room. To reveal the note now would ignite hopes her father could ill afford. Debts from the wool failure loomed, threatening the vicarage itself. Reverend Hawthorne entered then, his spectacles perched on his nose, a stack of unpaid bills in hand. At 55, his authority had frayed like old rope, yet he straightened, sensing the tension. "It's an invitation to the ball at Blackwood Hall," Eleanor began, voice steady despite the tremor within, "for the whole family, and a request for my presence regarding parish affairs." Her father's brow furrowed, the lines deepening. "Parish affairs? The Duke meddles in enclosures again, no doubt. Those common lands feed half the village, if he fences them off." He trailed off, rubbing his chin. The enclosures were the whisper that had grown to a rumble. Landowners like Edward consolidating fields for profit, displacing tenant farmers and squeezing the church's tithes. Eleanor's lessons with the parish girls often turned to worries of lost livelihoods, their small hands stitching samplers while mothers fretted over evictions. Margaret stepped forward, her frail frame taut with resolve. "This is Providence, Thomas. The ball is tomorrow eve. Eleanor, you must go and wear the red gown." Eleanor's stomach twisted, refusal clawed at her throat. The gown was a siren's call, its crimson hue a blatant challenge to the pale pastels of propriety. Vicar's daughters wore soft indigos and lavenders, blending into the background like the hedgerows. Red? It screamed of city balls in London, of women bold enough to court ruin. "Mother, it's improper. The matrons will gossip. Father, what if it's a trap? The Duke has ignored me for years. Why now?" Reverend Hawthorne paced, his boots scuffing the threadbare rug. "Ignored? You've spun fancies from glances, child. But this invitation, it's a door we cannot slam. Our debts mount, the bishop writes of scrutiny. If the Duke seeks counsel on enclosures, your voice, educated, compassionate, could sway him. Refuse and we risk offence. Accept and perhaps mercy for the flock." The social cost loomed stark. Willowbrook's hierarchies were ironclad. Gentry danced in saloons lit by beeswax candles, while families like theirs lingered at the edges, invited only by whim. A snub could mean shunned pews, withheld donations, isolation in a village where whispers spread faster than fire. Allies were few. Clara Benton, her apothecary friend, might offer a sympathetic ear, but even she treaded carefully around rank. Mentors, her father, with his sermons on duty, urged compliance. Antagonists stirred in the shadows. Lady Beatrice Langley, the Duke's sharp-tongued neighbour, whose estates bordered Blackwood and whose envy of eligible matches ran deep. Rumours painted her as a rival, ever watchful for slips in decorum. Eleanor rose, the decision crystallising like frost on glass. "I'll go, but on my terms." She retreated to her chamber, the narrow stairs creaking underfoot. The wardrobe door swung open, revealing the gown on its peg, a cascade of silk, its empire waist cinched high, sleeves puffed just so, the skirt flowing in layers that evoked Regency elegance without excess. No corset strangled her here. The fabric promised freedom, its color a defiant bloom against the muted tones of her life. She slipped it on, the material cool against her skin, hugging her slender curves with a whisper of scandal. In the speckled mirror, transformation stared back. Auburn hair piled in loose curls, green eyes alight, the red turning her from shadow to flame. Gloves of kid leather reached her elbows. A simple pearl necklace, her mother's gift, tempering the boldness. Pearls for purity, red for... what? Courage or folly? Downstairs her family waited in their finest, father in his best black coat, mother in grey bombazine, Timothy scrubbed and solemn. A hired gig awaited, lanterns flickering against the dusk. The drive to Blackwood Hall wound through twilight valleys, the manor's lights twinkling like stars fallen to earth. As they approached, the gravel crunched under wheels, and liveried footmen bowed them in. The grand saloon burst upon them, chandeliers dripping crystal, walls papered in damask, the air thick with perfume and violin strains. Gentry swirled in waltzes, ladies in empire gowns of gauze and satin, gentlemen in tailcoats and cravats. Eleanor felt eyes slide over her, murmurs rippling like wind through wheat. Who is she? The vicar's girl. In red? Lady Beatrice, resplendent in emerald silk, shot a venomous glance from across the room, her fan snapping shut. Then he appeared. Edward Blackwood, Duke of Ashford, at the room's heart, his broad frame clad in midnight blue velvet, gold buttons glinting. 30 years etched subtle lines on his face, war's shadow in the set of his jaw, blue eyes scanning with that familiar detachment. Yet when his gaze landed on Eleanor, it held. No fleeting dismissal this time. Heat flooded her cheeks as he excused himself from a cluster of admirers, striding toward her with purpose. "Miss Hawthorne," he said, voice low and resonant, like thunder wrapped in silk. He bowed, closer than propriety allowed, his cologne, sandalwood and leather, mingling with the roses pinned to her bodice. "You honor us with your presence. The gown suits you." Words failed her, the years of invisibility shattering in that gaze. "Your Grace," she managed, curtsying, her pulse a drumbeat. "The invitation mentioned parish concerns." He nodded, eyes darkening. "Later, dance with me first." His hand extended, gloved in fine leather, and the room seemed to hold its breath. She placed her palm in his, the touch electric, sealing a pact unspoken. As they joined the quadrille, whispers erupted, scandal's first spark. But deeper, in the Duke's tightening grip, Eleanor sensed the rupture. This night would demand choices. Alliances forged in fire, and obstacles rising like the hall's ancient walls. Yet as the music swelled, a shadow detached from the throng, Lady Beatrice, slipping toward the Duke's study, a sealed letter in hand. What secrets did she carry, and how would they unravel the fragile thread Eleanor had just begun to weave? The quadrille's lively steps carried Eleanor across the polished parquet floor of Blackwood Hall's saloon, her red silk gown swirling like a flame in the candlelight. Edward Blackwood's hand rested lightly at her waist, guiding her through the figures with a precision that spoke of battlefield discipline turned to dance. Around them, the assembly watched, fans fluttering like startled birds, whispers threading through the violin's melody. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt seen, not as the vicar's shadow, but as a woman whose presence commanded the room. As the music crested, Edward leaned in, his breath warm against her ear. "You move with grace, Miss Hawthorne, not the practiced steps of London salons, but something truer." His blue eyes held hers, a flicker of warmth breaking through the Duke's usual reserve. Eleanor's heart raced, the touch of his gloved fingers brushing her arm, sending a shiver up her spine. Yet propriety held her tongue. She merely smiled, dipping into the next turn. The dance ended to polite applause, but the murmurs swelled. Lady Beatrice Langley glided past, her emerald gown a verdant slash amid the pastels, her sharp features twisted in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. At 28, she was the widow of a minor baronet, her estates in the neighbouring valley a prize she guarded fiercely. Enclosures weren't her only ambition. Whispers hinted at designs on Blackwood's title, her invitations to the Duke's events a persistent siege. "Charming display, Your Grace," she cooed, curtsying low, though one wonders at the choice of partner, such vivid attire for a country ball. Eleanor's cheeks burned, the subtle barb landing like a pinprick. The room's eyes turned, assessing. A cluster of matrons near the punch bowl tittered behind gloved hands. Mrs. Hargrove, the squire's wife, her lace cap bobbing as she leaned to her companion. The vicar's daughter, in red, bold indeed. One might mistake her for an actress from Drury Lane. Friction of class crackled in the air, the invisible lines of rank drawing taut. Eleanor's family stood at the periphery, her father nodding stiffly to acquaintances, her mother clutching Timothy's arm, pride warring with unease. Edward's jaw tightened. A micro-gesture of defence, his hand lingering a beat too long on Eleanor's elbow as he escorted her from the floor. "Gossip is the Cotswolds' oldest harvest, Miss Beatrice," he replied coolly, his voice carrying just enough edge to silence the nearest listeners. "It yields little but chaff." He turned to Eleanor, shielding her from the stairs. "Shall we step onto the terrace? The air grows stifling." She nodded, grateful for the escape, though her pulse thrummed with the weight of scrutiny. The French doors opened to a stone balcony overlooking the moonlit gardens, where boxwoods clipped into geometric mazes whispered in the night breeze. Lanterns hung from iron brackets, casting golden pools on the gravel paths below. Edward released her arm, but the space between them felt charged, intimate in the hush away from the throng. "You mentioned parish concerns in your note," Eleanor ventured, smoothing her skirts to steady her hands. The red silk caught the light, a bold contrast to the Duke's sombre attire. His tailcoat of superfine wool, tailored to his broad shoulders, cravat snowy white against the shadow of his chin. Up close, she noted the faint scar tracing his jaw, a souvenir from Waterloo, hidden unless one looked closely. He leaned against the balustrade, gazing at the darkened valleys. "The enclosures. My agents propose fencing the commons to consolidate yields. Wool, corn, the estate's lifeblood. But it displaces tenants, squeezes the church lands. Your father preaches to those souls, I thought. Your insight might temper the plan." His eyes met hers again, searching. "You've taught the village girls, I hear. You understand their stakes." Surprise softened Eleanor's wariness. This was no idle summons. He valued her voice, however lowly her station. "The commons feed families, Your Grace. Fences mean hunger for some, while others feast. Is progress worth that price?" Her words hung bold, unfiltered, the red gown lending her courage. A silence stretched, broken only by distant laughter from the saloon. Edward's gaze lingered on her face, tracing the curve of her cheek, the way her auburn curls escaped their pins in the breeze. Perhaps not, if weighed against other costs. His fingers brushed a loose strand from her shoulder, a fleeting touch, innocent yet electric, igniting a spark of connection. In that shared quiet, Eleanor glimpsed the man behind the title, not the aloof duke, but one burdened by duty, his indifference a shield against war's ghosts. From the shadows of the garden path, a figure watched. Lady Beatrice, her silhouette merging with the yews, a small brooch glinting at her throat. It was an antique piece, a gold locket shaped like a fox's head, inherited from her late husband and said to hold a miniature portrait of some long-forgotten rival. She clutched it now, eyes narrowing, as she noted the Duke's proximity to Eleanor. Slipping back inside, she murmured to a footman, her voice a silken command. The evening wore on with a supper of cold collations, roast pheasant, syllabub in crystal bowls, served in the adjoining dining hall. Eleanor rejoined her family at a side table, the red gown drawing lingering glances, some admiring, others laced with envy. A young lieutenant, Hargrove's cousin, approached with a bow, requesting a dance, but Edward appeared at her side before she could reply, his presence a quiet claim. "Miss Hawthorne has promised the next set to me," he said smoothly, though no such promise existed. The lieutenant retreated with good grace, but the exchange rippled through the room. As the night deepened, Eleanor caught snippets of conversation near the card tables. "The Duke dances twice with the vicar's girl? Unheard of. That dress? Imported, no doubt. Who sponsors such extravagance?" Humiliation nipped at her heels, subtle as Lady Beatrice's fan taps on a gossip's arm, steering tales of impropriety. Yet in a stolen moment by the pianoforte, where a young miss played a lively country air, Edward pressed a small object into Eleanor's palm, a silver chatelaine pin engraved with Blackwood's crest, its chain dangling like a promise. "For your thoughts on the enclosures," he murmured. "Wear it tomorrow, if you visit the Manor Library. We might discuss further." Her fingers closed around it, the metal warm from his touch, initiating a quiet arc of emotion, trust budding amid the thorns of society. A roving glance, a shared silence under the chandeliers, small advances, fragile as first light. But as the Hawthorns prepared to depart, a liveried servant approached with a folded broadsheet, fresh from the local press, slipped into the Duke's hand by an anonymous source. Edward's face darkened as he scanned it, the headline proclaiming, "Duke's Ball! Vicar's heiress steals the spotlight in scarlet scandal." Whispers ignited anew, the consequence visible, spreading like ink on wet paper. Lady Beatrice's doing. As the carriage bore Eleanor home through the misty lanes, the pin weighed heavy in her pocket, a token of alliance and peril. What fresh intrigue awaited in the light of day? The first light of dawn crept over the Cotswolds hills, painting the mist-shrouded valleys in soft greys and golds. Eleanor Hawthorne woke with the silver chatelaine pin clutched in her fist, its chain tangled around her fingers like a secret vow. The broadsheet's scandalous headline had haunted her dreams, her name linked to the Duke in whispers of impropriety, but the pin grounded her, a tangible link to Edward's unexpected regard. She rose, slipping into a simple walking gown of dove-grey wool, its high neckline buttoned modestly, the skirt brushing her half-boots. No red today. Subtlety was her armour now. Breakfast passed in hushed tones at the vicarage. Her father buried himself in his Bible, avoiding her eyes, while her mother fussed over the teapot, murmuring about the night's triumph. Timothy, oblivious, chattered about the Duke's stallions. Eleanor excused herself early, claiming a need to consult parish records at the church. In truth, the pin burned against her skin, tucked into her pocket. Edward's invitation to the Manor Library echoed in her mind. Discuss the enclosures further. To refuse might seem coy, to accept bold. She chose the path through the dew-kissed meadows, the air sharp with the scent of wet earth and wild thyme. Blackwood Hall loomed as she approached, its stone facade softened by ivy, the morning sun glinting off mullioned windows. A groom took her horse at the stables, no grand carriage for a vicar's daughter, and directed her to the east wing. The library door stood ajar, revealing shelves towering to the ceiling, filled with leather-bound volumes that smelled of aged paper and beeswax. Edward was there, standing by a tall window, his back to her. He wore a morning coat of deep green superfine, breeches tucked into polished hessians, his raven hair tousled as if from a restless night. "Miss Hawthorne," he said without turning, his voice carrying a warmth that surprised her. "You came." She curtsied, heart quickening. "Your Grace, the enclosures. I couldn't stay silent on the matter." Her eyes scanned the room. A roaring fire in the marble hearth, a globe on a mahogany desk, armchairs upholstered in faded velvet. No servants in sight. The space felt intimately theirs. He gestured to a table laden with maps and ledgers, unrolled parchments showing the common lands in neat grids. "Sit, I've pored over these since the ball." As they bent over the documents, their shoulders nearly touched, the air between them humming with unspoken tension. Eleanor's fingers traced a boundary line, arguing for shared pastures to ease the tenant's plight. Edward listened, his blue eyes intent, nodding at her points. For the first time, she saw the strategist beneath the Duke, the man who had charged through cannon fire at Waterloo, now wrestling with ledgers instead of sabres. Thunder rumbled distant as they spoke, the sky darkening beyond the panes. Rain began as a patter, then a torrent, lashing the windows like an angry sea. "The storm," Eleanor murmured, glancing up. The Cotswolds' weather turned swift. Paths would turn to mud, trapping her here. Edward straightened, a faint smile tugging his lips. "Providence, perhaps. We can continue without interruption." He poured tea from a silver service, handing her a cup with a steady gaze. As lightning cracked, illuminating his scarred jaw, he set his own cup down. "You've a keen mind, Eleanor. Not many dare challenge these plans." The use of her given name startled her, softening the formality. "And you listen, Your Grace. That's rarer still." A pause hung, heavy with the storm's roar. She sipped, the warmth spreading through her, mirroring the thaw in his demeanor. He moved to a shelf, pulling down a small, worn book, its cover cracked leather, gold lettering faded. "This belonged to my mother," he said, voice lowering. "A collection of poems by Wordsworth. She read to me here, before the fever took her when I was 12. He opened it, fingers lingering on a page yellowed with age. The Lake District inspired him, but these hills, they echo the same solitude. Eleanor leaned closer, the inherited object bridging their worlds. He read aloud, his baritone steady over the gale, lines of wandering souls and hidden depths. The words unveiled layers, the Duke's grief, a boy orphaned young, thrust into titles and duties that armored his heart. "War took more than comrades," he confessed, closing the book. "At Waterloo I led men to slaughter, promising glory that never came. Guilt clings like this rain. Duty demands I enclose the lands for the estate's survival, yet it wounds the very souls I swore to protect." Tears pricked Eleanor's eyes, her own wounds surfacing. "My mother clings to dreams of betterment, but father's debts, they chain us. I've mended gowns while hunger gnaws at the parish. We all bear scars hidden under propriety." Their hands brushed as she touched the book, a gesture simple yet profound. No consummation, only trust blooming in the firelight, a tacit promise in his nod, the emotional tide shifting from duty to understanding. Outside, the storm raged fiercer, wind howling through the chimneys. Edward rose to secure a rattling sash, his silhouette strong against the flashes. "Stay until it passes. You're safe here." In that confinement, humanized by shared vulnerability, Eleanor felt the spark ignite deeper. He was no longer the distant Duke, but Edward, flawed, compassionate. She smiled, the pin in her pocket a quiet anchor. Yet as the rain eased to a drizzle, a knock echoed, sharp, insistent. A footman entered, dripping wet, bearing a sealed letter on a salver. Edward broke the wax, his face paling. "From Lady Beatrice," he read aloud, voice tightening. "She claims knowledge of your family's debts, Miss Hawthorne, and threatens to expose irregularities in the parish tithes unless I reconsider certain alliances." Eleanor's blood ran cold, the warmth shattering like glass. The antagonist's envoy had struck, a message that dragged their fragile confidence into shadow. What leverage did Beatrice wield, and how deep did her sabotage run? As the clouds parted, revealing a treacherous path home, Eleanor wondered if their budding trust could weather this new gale. The drizzle had scarcely lifted when Eleanor and Edward stepped from the library, the air heavy with the scent of wet stone and lingering storm. Blackwood Hall's corridors echoed with their footsteps, the Duke's presence a steady anchor beside her. Yet the letter from Lady Beatrice crumpled in Edward's pocket like a venomous serpent, its words poisoning the fragile warmth they'd forged. Eleanor glanced at him, her green eyes searching his profile, the scar on his jaw stark in the dim light from wall sconces. "What irregularities does she mean, Your Grace?" "Our tithes are modest but honest." Edward's jaw clenched, his blue eyes storm-dark. "Beatrice plays at shadows. She's long coveted alliances here, lands, influence. This is her blade, aimed at our discussion." "Goody." He halted at a window overlooking the sodden gardens, his hand brushing hers briefly, a silent reassurance. But doubt crept in, cold as the rain-slicked panes. The chatelaine pin weighed in Eleanor's pocket, no longer a token of trust but a chain linking her to peril. By midday, word spread through Willowbrook like foxfire in the night. A messenger from Lady Beatrice's estate arrived at the vicarage, bearing another missive, this one for Reverend Hawthorne, sealed with her fox-head crest. Eleanor watched from the parlour as her father broke it open, his face draining of colour. "Blackmail," he whispered, voice cracking. "She claims evidence of falsified accounts in the parish ledgers, debts hidden to secure loans from the squire. If I don't withdraw support for the Commons, she'll present it to the bishop, ruin for us all." Margaret gasped, her needle dropping from gnarled fingers. Timothy froze mid-bite of bread, eyes wide. Eleanor's stomach knotted, the enclosures, Edward's plans, now twisted into a noose. Beatrice's attack was frontal, public in its reach. By noon, villagers gathered at the churchyard, murmuring of the Duke's seduction of the vicar's daughter to sway land deals. A broadsheet hawked in the square screamed headlines, "Duke's dalliance, vicar's debts exposed in scarlet plot." Her red gown, once a bold flame, now branded her a temptress, the scandal leaping from whispers to shouts. Eleanor slipped out, cloak drawn tight against the chill, heading for the brook where Clara waited. But even her friend, loyal as kin, met her with wary eyes under her bonnet's brim. "Eleanor, the whole village buzzes. Lady Beatrice rode through at dawn, telling tales of you ensnaring the Duke in his library, alone, with maps and intimacies. They say your family forged ties to fund that gown from London. It's everywhere." Isolation gripped Eleanor like fog rolling off the hills. No longer the quiet teacher in the church hall, now she was shunned, glances averted at the market, doors closing to her knocks. The parish girls' mothers barred their daughters from lessons, fearing taint. Her father's allies, squire and apothecary, sent curt notes withdrawing aid, Beatrice's sabotage fracturing the fragile web of support. The consequence was tangible. A bailiff arrived by afternoon, demanding immediate repayment of loans, his warrant citing irregularities sourced from anonymous testimony. Reverend Hawthorne's hands shook as he packed ledgers, the vicarage's walls closing in. Edward came at dusk, his horse lathered from a hard ride, dismounting at the garden gate. Rain started anew, sheeting down as he approached, coat dripping. Eleanor met him there, away from prying eyes, her heart a tumult of hope and fear. "Your Grace." "Edward," she said, the name slipping out like a confession. "Beatrice strikes at us both. The village turns. My father faces inquiry. We must confront her." His face, usually composed, twisted with fury, a rare crack in the Duke's armour. "She's overreached. I rode to her estate. She denied nothing. Flaunting letters from my agents, twisted to imply collusion with your family. The enclosures halt until cleared, but the damage." He stepped closer, rain mingling with the tears she blinked back. "Our talk in the library, it's poisoned now. They see not partnership, but plot. The break came swift, emotional as a snapped bridle. Edward's hand cupped her cheek, thumb tracing her jaw in a gesture of aching tenderness. "I cannot drag you deeper, Eleanor. Society's eyes devour the weak. Retire from this, return the pin, let me handle Beatrice alone." His voice broke, the war hero yielding to the man who feared losing her to scandals more. She recoiled, the words a wound deeper than gossip. "Retire? After you saw me? Truly saw? This is no return to shadows. It's exile." The chatelaine pin pulled from her pocket, glinted in her palm. She pressed it back into his hand, the metal cold now, symbol of shattered trust. No accusations against them, no cells or chains, just the slow bleed of reputation, forcing separation. The moment sealed it, no going back to invisibility. Her action, defying the Duke's withdrawal by vowing to uncover Beatrice's proofs, crossed the line, binding her to the fray irrevocably. As Edward mounted, thunder rumbling overhead, he called back, voice raw, "Stay safe, I'll summon you when the storm breaks." But his eyes held ultimatum, distance or mutual ruin. Eleanor watched him vanish into the gloom, isolation settling like night. Beatrice's rise cast long shadows, her fox locket perhaps hiding more than portraits, forged documents, spies in the manor's halls. What price would Eleanor pay to reclaim her light, and could their bond survive this chasm? Eleanor Hawthorne stood in the garden's chill downpour, the returned chatelaine pin's absence, a hollow ache in her palm. Edward's horse had vanished into the gathering dusk, leaving her with the sting of his withdrawal, a chasm carved by Lady Beatrice's machinations. The vicarage door creaked open behind her, her mother's frail silhouette beckoning. "Come inside, child. The rain will drown your sorrows, if not your spirit." But Eleanor lingered, rain tracing paths down her cheeks like unshed tears. Isolation wrapped her tighter than any cloak. The village's turned backs felt like exile in her own home. That night, sleep evaded her. Tossing on her narrow bed, the red gown draped over a chair like a bloodied flag of defeat. Dawn brought no solace, only a resolve hardening like frost on the windowpane. Beatrice's threats weren't mere spite, they reeked of deeper design. Eleanor's mind raced back to fragments, the fox locket at the ball, glinting as Beatrice watched from the shadows. Her late husband's estate bordered Blackwood lands. Enclosures would swallow them whole if Edward proceeded. But why target the Hawthorns? Father's debts were real, yet the irregularities rang false, a forgery to fracture alliances. She rose early, slipping into a sturdy pelisse over her morning gown, its wool damp from the night's storm. The church hall, her former sanctuary, stood empty now, the parish girls' samplers abandoned on shelves, but in the vestry, amid stacks of dusty ledgers, opportunity stirred. Reverend Hawthorne had locked away the parish accounts days prior, fearing the bailiff's return. "Father," she said at breakfast, voice steady, "let me review the books. If falsehoods lurk, I'll find them before Beatrice twists the knife." He hesitated, his eyes weary hollows. "It's peril, Eleanor. But yes, prove our innocence." The key turned in the lock with a solemn click. Hours blurred as she pored over entries. Tithes tallied in her father's meticulous hand, loans noted plainly, no hidden sums, no forgeries. Yet one ledger caught her eye, a slim volume from 5 years past, tucked behind others. Its pages, yellowed and dog-eared, held not accounts but letters, clipped between sheets. The top one bore Beatrice's crest, addressed to a London solicitor. Eleanor's breath caught. "I require discretion in fabricating discrepancies for the Hawthorne vicarage," it read, dated just after the wool failure. "A modest investment. Ensure their debts appear fraudulent, linking to Blackwood's enclosures. Reward upon success." Below, replies confirmed payments, bribes to sway Edward's agents, testimonies planted in village taverns. A miniature portrait slipped free. Not Beatrice's husband, but a sketch of Edward in uniform, annotated with spiteful notes. The Duke's guilt over Waterloo blinds him to threats. Exploit it. And deepest, a diary excerpt. Beatrice's hand confessing envy, a plot hatched after Waterloo to wed Edward through scandal, using enclosures as leverage. Manipulation laid bare, debts inflated, rumors seeded, all to isolate him, force his hand. Rage surged, hot and righteous. This was no rivalry, it was a web spun from greed and malice, ensnaring innocence. The peak of indignation crested in Eleanor's chest, the villain unmasked, her cruelty a poison seeping through Willowbrook's veins. But proof alone wouldn't suffice. She needed agency, a public stand to shatter the lies. By noon she penned a letter, not to Edward, but to the squire and apothecary, key voices in the parish assembly. "Gentlemen," it began, elegant script belying her fury. "Falsehoods assail our community. I enclose evidence of Lady Beatrice Langley's deceit, letters proving fabricated debts, and sown scandals to thwart the Commons' defence." Copies went to the local Gazette, her initiative a bold stroke altering perceptions, from tarnished vicar's daughter to truth's champion. No hiding now, she sealed them with the hawthorn dove, dispatching Timothy on his pony. Word spread like wildfire through the misty lanes. Villagers gathered at the churchyard, murmuring as the letters circulated. Mothers who had barred their daughters now nodded to Eleanor in the square, eyes softening. "You've vindicated us, Miss Hawthorne," the miller's wife said, pressing a loaf into her hands. Social tides shifted. The bailiff, summoned back, reviewed the proofs and withdrew with muttered apologies. Beatrice's response came swift, a valley of danger. Her carriage rattled past the vicarage at twilight, a glare through the window, promising retaliation. Whispers hinted at her dispatching riders to London, seeking fresh allies, to discredit the letters as forgeries. Yet hope peaked as Edward arrived unannounced, his stallion's hooves churning mud. He dismounted, coat unbuttoned against the chill. Blue eyes alight with something fiercer than duty, gratitude, reframing his earlier coldness as protective guilt, not indifference. "Eleanor," he said, striding to her in the garden, voice urgent, "your letter reached me first. The proofs, they absolve everything. Beatrice's plot unravels. I've halted her agents, confronted her envoy." He took her hands, gloved palms warm, the touch a bridge of trust rebuilding. No passion's blaze, only contained reapproximation, his thumb tracing her knuckles, eyes holding hers with quiet intensity. "I withdrew to shield you from my shadows, the war's weight, but you've lit the path." She squeezed his fingers. "The emotional advance a balm. Guilt chained you as debts chained us. Together we break free." In that moment, alliance solidified, stronger than whispers or scandals. But Beatrice's threat loomed greater. A missive arrived by courier, summoning the village to an emergency assembly at her estate tomorrow eve, a public forum disguised as mediation on the enclosures. All parties must attend. It demanded. Her trap sprung to counter Eleanor's revelations with bought testimonies. Edward's jaw set. "We'll go. Face her in the light." As night fell, Eleanor gazed at the hills, heart steady. The assembly awaited, a decisive clash where truths would duel and their bond might forge or fracture anew. The carriage wheels crunched over gravel as Eleanor's family approached Langley Hall under a slate-grey sky, the Cotswolds wind whipping the hems of their cloaks. It was the eve of the assembly, and Willowbrook's gentry had converged, squires in wool greatcoats, matrons in fur-trimmed pelisses, villagers huddled at the edges in their Sunday best. The estate sprawled like a jealous sentinel, its manicured lawns scarred by recent rains, the foxhead crest glaring from every gatepost. Eleanor sat rigid beside her father, the red gown traded for a sober gown of deep blue merino, its high waist and long sleeves a shield of restraint. Yet beneath, the chatelaine pin, returned to her that morning by Edward, pressed against her bodice, a talisman of resolve. Edward rode ahead, his stallion cutting through the throng, blue eyes scanning for her amid the arriving coaches. He dismounted with fluid grace, offering his arm as she stepped down, the gesture public, unyielding. Whispers rippled, the Duke and the vicar's daughter side by side, defying the scandal's residue. Reverend Hawthorne nodded approval, his ledger tucked underarm like a sword. Margaret clutched Timothy's hand, her frail frame buoyed by the shifting tides of village sentiment. Clara Benton waited near the entrance, her bonnet ribbons fluttering, a quiet ally in the fray. Inside the assembly room, chandeliers flickered over polished oak panels, the air thick with pipe smoke and anticipation. Rows of chairs faced a dais where Lady Beatrice held court, resplendent in burgundy velvet, her fox locket dangling like a trophy. At 40, her sharp features held a predatory gleam, flanked by 2 witnesses, hired men from Oxford, their faces weathered, coats ill-fitting. The crowd murmured, enclosures debated, but undercurrents of debt and dalliance simmered. Squire Hargrove called the room to order, his voice booming. We gather for mediation on the Commons. Lady Langley proposes terms. The Duke counters. Speak truth, all. Beatrice rose, fan snapping like a whip. Indeed, but truth demands justice first. She gestured, and a footman distributed dossiers, thin packets of vellum stamped with forged seals. Gasps echoed as pages turned, ledgers doctored to show Hawthorne tithes siphoned for luxuries. A letter purportedly from Edward to Eleanor, promising lands for favours rendered. The final sabotage, her bought witnesses stepped forward, oaths sworn on a Bible. "Saw the vicar altar books myself," the first grunted, eyes darting. "And the Duke met her in the library, maps aside, indecent whispers, clear as day." The second nodded, spinning tales of midnight rides, the red gown as evidence of seduction. Murmurs swelled to outrage, matrons clutched pearls, villagers shifted uneasily, Eleanor's cheeks flamed, the room's judgment a noose tightening. Beatrice's smile triumphed, her web spun to trap them, enclosures secured through ruin. Edward's hand tensed on Eleanor's arm, but she stilled him, heart pounding. This was the abyss, the choice, moral and raw. A yield to lies or bare the soul before society. She rose, voice clear over the din. Lies woven from envy, my lords, ladies, friends of Willowbrook. The room hushed, eyes widening at her audacity, a vicar's daughter commanding the dais. Edward nodded, pride flickering in his gaze as she climbed the steps, pulling the slim ledger from her father's grasp. "These dossiers? Forgeries, as my discoveries prove." She opened the book, pages rustling like autumn leaves. Here, the letters Lady Beatrice penned to a London solicitor, bribes for false accounts. Gasps rippled as she read aloud, her tone steady, elegant, dates, sums, the fox crest damning. The crowd leaned forward, Squire Hargrove snatching a copy, brow furrowing. Eleanor's contra-attack unfolded, intelligent, unyielding. She called Clara forward, the apothecary's daughter, trembling but resolute. "I saw Beatrice's man slip these into the church vestry weeks ago," Clara testified, voice gaining strength. "Hid them to plant doubt." Then Timothy, scrubbed and solemn, produced the diary excerpt, his young hand steady, found it in her carriage wheel, muddied but whole. Beatrice blanched, fan faltering. Slander! These girls, jealous spinsters, the boy a liar. But her witnesses faltered, sweat beading as Edward rose, voice like tempered steel. "My agents confirm. Payments traced to your coffers, Lady Langley. Enclosures weren't your aim. They masked a bid for my hand through chaos." He revealed a retrieved letter, ink fresh from confrontation, Beatrice's confession to a confederate. plotting scandal since Waterloo to exploit his guilt. The room erupted, villagers cheering, gentry murmuring approval. Squire Hargrove banged his gavel. Proof undeniable. The commons remain open, debts cleared by estate funds. Lady Langley, your schemes end here. The pico de euphoria crashed like a wave. Beatrice's face crumpled, locket clutched in white-knuckled fury as footmen escorted her out, her empire crumbling amid jeers. The community reenquadrada Eleanor. From scarlet temptress to village saviour, nods and smiles washing over her like spring rain. Matrons approached, apologies flowing. The miller's wife embraced her, whispering thanks. Edward's eyes met hers across the dais, a silent vow in their depths. The assembly dissolved into relieved chatter, enclosures resolved with shared pastures, debts absolved by the Duke's quiet generosity. If this tale of triumph has your heart racing, hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss any other exciting story from the channel. As lanterns dimmed and guests departed into the night, Edward drew Eleanor aside to the hall's shadowed alcove. The crowd's echoes fading. Rain pattered softly outside, a gentle hush after the storm. His fingers brushed hers, intertwining briefly, a tacit commitment, intimate in its restraint. You defined us tonight, Eleanor. Not duke and daughter, but equals in truth. She leaned into the silence, their breaths sinking, the future a shared horizon. Yet in Beatrice's abandoned dais, a crumpled note lay overlooked, a final whisper of alliance from London shadows. What lingering threat might yet stir? The alcove's shadows enveloped Eleanor and Edward like a velvet curtain. The assembly's clamour a distant hum beyond the oak-panelled walls. Rain tapped a rhythmic lullaby on the leaded windows, washing away the day's tempests. Edward's fingers lingered on hers, warm and sure, his blue eyes reflecting the lantern's glow. No words passed between them at first, just the steady rise and fall of shared breaths, a bridge rebuilt from the ruins of scandal. You stood unbreakable tonight, he murmured finally, his voice low, threaded with awe. Not for duty, but for what is right. We owe you everything. Eleanor met his gaze, her green eyes steady, transformed by the fire she'd kindled in the dais. The quiet girl, who once faded into Willowbrook's mists, now carried a voice honed sharp, compassion laced with steel. We stood together, Edward. Your trust gave me wings. She squeezed his hand, the gesture sealing their bond, not as duke and supplicant, but equals forged in trial. Footsteps approached, shattering the intimacy. Squire Hargrove bustled in, his ruddy face alight with purpose, trailed by Reverend Hawthorne and Clara Benton. The matter's settled, your grace, the squire declared, clapping Edward on the shoulder. Langley Hall's deeds reviewed at once, enclosures voided, commons preserved, with shared rights for tenants. The bishop's envoy arrives tomorrow to clear the vicarage ledgers. No irregularities, just honest toil. Reverend Hawthorne nodded, his weary lines softening for the first time in months. Providence, indeed. The flock breathes easier. He turned to Eleanor, pride swelling in his chest. You've lifted us, daughter. The parish school, your dream of teaching beyond samplers, shall have funds from the estate, a library too, stocked for all. Edward inclined his head. Consider it done. Blackwood's resources serve Willowbrook now, not just the title. His leadership shone clear, no longer the haunted warrior, but a steward with vision, channeling war's lessons into peace. Clara beamed, her freckled cheeks flushing. And me? The apothecary's shop gets a wing for village remedies. Your testimony sealed it, Eleanor. Allies rewarded, their fates intertwined in the new weave. But justice's blade fell swift on Beatrice. Word came by dawn's light as mist clung to the hills. A courier from London, dispatched by Edward's solicitors, bore the verdict. Her forgeries exposed, bribes traced to her coffers. The courts moved with Regency rigor, no trial for the gentry but consequences carved deep. her estate seized for restitution, debts to the Hawthorns and tenants repaid in full, exiled to a modest cottage in distant Kent, stripped of titles, graces, Beatrice vanished from the Cotswolds whispers. Her fox locket, confiscated as evidence, its secrets, forged letters, spiteful sketches, burned in the manor's hearth. No return. Her prestige crumbled like autumn leaves, a cautionary tale traded in taverns. The days blurred into a gentle rhythm, threads of family and law tying loose ends. Reverend Hawthorne's debts evaporated, the vicarage repaired with fresh thatch and lime-washed walls. Margaret, her hands steadier, stitched not from desperation, but joy, quilts for the new parish school, where Eleanor now led classes in letters and law. Timothy apprenticed under the squire, his patched breeches traded for proper woolens. Even neutral shifted. Mrs. Hargrove, once a tittering matron, hosted teas at the vicarage, her lace cap bobbing in newfound respect. Edward and Eleanor's bond deepened in quiet rites, free of toxicity's shadow. One crisp afternoon, 2 weeks hence, he led her to the manor's rose garden, renewed, thorns pruned, blooms unfurling under the sun. No ancient heirlooms burdened them. He slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, forged anew in Oxford, its surface etched with intertwined doves, their emblem untainted. "By choice, Eleanor," he said, kneeling on the gravel path, voice rough with emotion. "Marry me, not for rank, but for the woman who saw through my armor." Tears traced her cheeks as she drew him up. "Yes, Edward, equals, always." Their lips met then. Not a stolen glance, but a kiss born of love, soft, fervent, sealing vows under the open sky. The horizon stretched before them, Blackwood Hall's turrets against rolling hills, a future of shared stewardship. No grand fanfare, just them, the wind sighing approval. Their transformations bloomed evident. Eleanor, once invisible, now led the school with compassionate fire, her voice rallying villagers for communal harvests. Edward, unburdened by guilt, rode the lanes not as sentinel but neighbour, his leadership weaving estate and parish into harmony. The legacy took root. The Willowbrook Library opened at Michaelmas, shelves groaning with volumes, Wordsworth beside practical tomes on farming, open to all. The school followed, girls like those Eleanor once taught now dreaming beyond stitches, their laughter echoing through stone halls. Coadjuvants found places anew. Clara wed the lieutenant, her boldness rewarded with a home overlooking the brook. The squire, repositioned as mediator, hosted assemblies where class lines blurred, dances mingling gentry and folk. Even the miller's wife, once wary, contributed linens to the library, her gratitude a quiet alliance. As autumn deepened, Eleanor stood with Edward on Blackwood's balcony, watching leaves drift like golden confetti. Their hands rested on her abdomen, subtle, unspoken, a new life stirring, promise of heirs born not to chains but choice. The crumpled note from Beatrice's dais, investigated and dismissed, a desperate plea to a false ally, no threat remaining. Yet in the post's arrival that eve, a letter slipped through. From a London cousin, hinting at Eleanor's distant kin seeking reunion. A soft hook, perhaps, to futures yet woven. For now equilibrium reigned, love triumphant, legacy enduring, the Cotswolds whispering of hearts mended in red silk and unyielding truth. 5 years had woven their gentle tapestry over Willowbrook, softening the Cotswolds' edges with time's quiet hand. The year was 1820, and Blackwood Hall stood prouder than ever, its ivy-clad stones bathed in the golden haze of a late summer afternoon. Eleanor Blackwood, once Hawthorne, surveyed the scene from the library window, her hand resting lightly on the swell of her third child's impending arrival. At 27, she moved with the assured grace of a duchess who had earned her title, not through birth, but through battles of wit and heart. Her auburn hair, now threaded with subtle silver from worries weathered, framed a face luminous with fulfillment. The red gown of that fateful ball hung preserved in a cedar chest upstairs, a relic of transformation, its silk faded but spirit undimmed. Edward stood beside her, his arm encircling her waist with familiar tenderness. 35 now, the lines of war had eased from his brow, replaced by the warmth of a man redeemed. His raven hair showed hints of grey at the temples, a badge of stewardship rather than strife. The scar on his jaw caught the light as he smiled down at their children romping in the garden below. "Look at them, Eleanor! Our legacy in motion." His voice, still resonant, carried no trace of the haunted detachment that once armoured him. The eldest, Thomas, named for her father, chased his sister Clara, after her bold friend, through the rose arbours. At 4, Thomas brandished a wooden sword, mimicking his father's tales of valour, while 2-year-old Clara gathered petals in her pinafore, her laughter a melody that echoed the brooks of Willowbrook. The love between Eleanor and Edward had not merely endured, it had flourished, rooted deep in the soil of mutual respect. Their marriage, solemnized in St. Mary's Church 6 months after the assembly, had been a village affair. Simple vows exchanged under the spire, with garlands of wild roses and the parish choir singing hymns of unity. No grand London cathedral for them. Their bond thrived in the hills that had tested it. The vicarage, once a threadbare haven, had transformed under their care. Reverend Hawthorne, retired at 60, now tended a modest glebe garden, his sermons traded for grandfatherly stories told to his grandchildren. The debts that had haunted him were ghosts long banished, repaid through Edward's discreet funds and the estate's shared prosperity. Margaret, Eleanor's mother, had passed 2 winters prior, her frail hands finally still after seeing her daughter's triumph. In her final days, she had embroidered a christening gown for Thomas, whispering of dreams fulfilled. "You wore red and claimed your light, child," she had said, eyes misty. Timothy, grown to 20, managed the parish school as headmaster, his once patched breeches now fine wool trousers, wed to a miller's daughter who brought fresh bread to every lesson. Willowbrook itself had bloomed from the ashes of scandal. The commons remained open, fenced only where tenants agreed, yielding bountiful harvests that fed the hungry and filled the coffers. The library Eleanor championed stood at the village heart, a sturdy stone building funded by Blackwood's purse, its shelves groaning with volumes from Wordsworth to agricultural treatises. Girls like those she once taught now pored over maps and novels, their samplers gathering dust as pens took their place. Social changes rippled outward, assemblies at the hall mingled gentry and folk, quadrilles danced without rigid lines, and the squire's teas welcomed apothecary daughters alongside ladies of title. Clara Benton Hargrove, her friendship a steadfast thread, visited often with her own brood, 3 lively ones from her union with the lieutenant. "You've remade this place, Eleanor," she would say over tea in the sunlit parlour, her freckles unchanged by motherhood. "No more whispers of scarlet scandals. Now it's tales of the Duchess who saved the commons." Edward's leadership had woven these changes seamlessly. He rode the lanes daily, not as overlord but partner, consulting farmers on yields and hosting markets where villagers bartered freely. The war's guilt that once shadowed him had lifted, transmuted into compassion. He endowed scholarships for parish boys to study in Oxford, ensuring no family echoed the Hawthorne's struggles. Yet not all had escaped unscathed. Lady Beatrice Langley paid dearly for her venom. Exiled to Kent's fringes, her seized estates auctioned to settle claims, she lived in obscurity, a spinster aunt to distant kin, her sharp tongue dulled by isolation. Whispers reached Willowbrook of her faded gowns and empty salons, the fox locket long melted down for coin. No redemption for her. Society, ever vigilant, ensured her scheme's price was eternal solitude. Justice without mercy, Edward had reflected once, his arm around Eleanor as they watched the sunset. She chose shadows, we claimed the light. As evening deepened, the children tumbled indoors, cheeks flushed and hands muddy. Thomas clambered onto Edward's knee, demanding a story of the red dress adventure. Eleanor laughed, settling Clara in her lap, the babe's tiny fingers tracing the dove-etched ring on her hand. Dinner followed in the hall, roast pheasant from the estate, syllabub for dessert, shared with the family, laughter weaving through candle flames. Later, in their chamber, Edward drew Eleanor close by the fire, his kiss soft against her temple. 5 years, and each feels like dawn after storm. She nestled against him, the child's kick a joyful punctuation. Our love endures because it was chosen. Edward, through trials, it grew unbreakable. The horizon beyond the window promised more, expanding the school, perhaps a wing for artists, or journeys to the Lake District that inspired his mother's poems. Willowbrook thrived, a testament to their will. Hearts mended, futures bright, the red thread of fate now a golden weave. In the quiet, as stars pricked the velvet sky, Eleanor whispered a prayer of thanks. The girl who once faded into shadows had become the light of her world, her legacy echoing in every laugh, every open book, every shared glance with the man who finally saw her. And in that enduring harmony, peace reigned supreme. As the stars wheeled over Willowbrook that fateful night 5 years on, Eleanor Blackwood closed the library door softly behind her, the weight of the day settling like a well-earned cloak. The children slept upstairs, their breaths even and innocent, while Edward's study lamp still burned low, casting a golden pool across maps of expanded commons and plans for the school's new wing. She paused in the corridor, her hand trailing the polished banister, and let the lessons of their journey flood her mind, not as distant echoes, but as living fire to warm the soul. What began in the shadows of a vicar's modest life, with a red dress daring the light, taught her the unyielding power of seeing and being seen. Eleanor had learned that true strength blooms not in silence, but in the bold step forward, even when society's gaze judges harshly. The enclosures, the scandals, Beatrice's venom, they were trials that forged resilience, reminding everyone that integrity outshines title or fortune. Edward, too, had transformed, his war-scarred heart, once walled by duty, opened to vulnerability, proving that love thrives when guilt yields to shared purpose. Their union whispered a timeless truth, equals in spirit conquer what ranks divide. Willowbrook's renewal, the library's open doors, the girls' eager voices over books, stood as proof that one person's courage can ripple into communal dawn, lifting the overlooked to lead. Yet the heart of it all was choice. Eleanor chose the gown, the truth, the partnership, turning indifference into alliance. In a world of rigid hierarchies where whispers could shatter reputations, she claimed agency, showing that compassion, laced with resolve, dismantles deceit. Beatrice's fall. A stark warning, malice devours its wielder, leaving only isolation, no shortcuts to legacy. It builds on honesty, brick by honest brick. If this tale of hidden fires and triumphant hearts has stirred something deep within you, pause now and reflect on your own unseen strengths. What bold step might you take today to step from shadow into light? Share your thoughts in the comments below. What moved you most in Eleanor's journey? Did the Duke's gaze finally change everything for you too? And to prove you've journeyed to this heartfelt end, write the word crimson there. It'll let me know true fans reached the close, helping spread these stories to more dreamers like you. For more romances woven from history's threads, tales of forbidden glances across ballrooms, whispers in misty gardens, and loves that defy the ages, check the cards above. Your next adventure awaits, full of passion and peril in Regency England's embrace. Until then, carry that spark. Let it guide you to your own red dress moment. Thank you for sharing this path. Your engagement keeps the hearth alive.